Hi, so I just want to say a few words about Biden's first week in office, just over a week now. Well, actually 10 days. Um, yeah, I don't want to go into huge detail about policy area, really, really in depth, because frankly, I don't know enough about some American domestic politics to go into the really, really in depth side of it. I just don't have that information. I'll say one thing though, people who, dismiss President Biden as Sleepy Joe, whatever you think of the man, you can't say what he's done in the last week has been sleepy. Um, he has now passed more legislation in his first week, I understand, and I'm open to be corrected on this, but he has now signed more legislation than any president at that stage. Um, I think 17 Trump era policy areas he overturned with the stroke of a pen in that first week. Now, you might not like it, you might think he's a puppet of the far left or whatever, but that's not lazy. It's not certainly not sleepy. On the issue of Biden sometimes stumbling his words, and he does, he done it in the debate, and he occasionally misplaces words. I think the Trump people home in on that. Trump supporters home in on that. Well, firstly, Biden used to have a stutter, so it may be that there's just little side effect of that coming through. Honestly, at this stage, I don't think it's a major issue. When I hear Joe Biden, most of the time I hear a man who's coherent and clear. Yes, he does stumble sometimes, but if you want to get down to the nitty gritty of it, so did George W. Bush. Trump didn't necessarily stumble his words, but he came out with a lot of very ignorant statements. Um, so this is just a bit of a cheap shot, I think, from Trump supporters. Um, if there's a point where Biden really, really starts, showing signs of Alzheimer's or something, that will be, a legitimate debate. That will be something that's, maybe then there needs to be serious discussion around that. But for a 78-year-old man, I think Biden's actually pretty energetic. That's my perception. Um, there's a few concerns I have about Biden. I hope that the sort of how can I put it? I hope that the policy area that he really, really does focus on, foreign policy, is on standing up to China. I think that's critical now. It's notable Anthony Blinken, the new Secretary of State, agrees with his predecessor, Mike Pompeo. I actually respect Pompeo in terms of his stance on China. I think Pompeo was a good Secretary of State in that sense. Maybe not in every area. Sometimes Pompeo kind of overshot his brief, but when it came to China, I think Pompeo was right. Blinken seems to be following that line and agreeing basically with genocide designation of what China's doing to the Uyghur people. I think those who think that Biden's going to be a China puppet are going to be in for a surprise. Now, it may be that Biden doesn't go as far as he should, but the idea that he'll be a puppet of China, this is a man who's been speaking out on human rights issues long before Donald Trump even thought about getting into politics. So that's just a typical example of the sort of distortion that Trump supporters come out with. Not that Trump supporters really give a shit about human rights. I don't think they do. I don't think Trump cares about human rights. This is a man who is on record as defending torture. He supported waterboarding. So I think that a lot of people, particularly in Hong Kong, who kind maybe it's I don't know what information they're looking at, whether it's Fox News or just pro-Trump outlets, but they really had this idea that Trump was some sort of great crusader for the people of Hong Kong and Hong Kong democracy activists. I think that's a gross distortion, and that's not everyone. There's a lot of Hong Kong activists that knew full well that Trump wasn't necessarily their go-to. But Biden does need to reach out. He needs to stand by Taiwan, stand by the Uyghurs, stand by Hong Kong, and really, really take a bold stand on this because we're at a critical time in history. Um, Biden may be the president to whom the overlap from the United States being the global hegemony to China being the global hegemony happens. It's scheduled that the Chinese economy will surpass the American economy as little as within the next 10 years. Now, that may be Biden's successor, whether that's Kamala Harris or her Republican opponent, who knows? But this is something that is arguably the number one priority for any American president. Biden needs to really, really take that seriously. But I'm sick and tired, frankly, of Trump cultists and their nonsense. We have them in the UK. You know, the Sun newspaper, it's full of Trump supporters because their videos, all Biden has to do is say one word, and these people are already in the little thumbing down phase. It's like they're not even giving the man a chance. Um, Sky News Australia is another one. It's just a mouthpiece for Donald Trump. Um, they may be right to be assertive about China, but I'm sick and tired of Trump supporters not letting it go, not accepting the fact that they lost, Biden won, and moving on. I'm not saying Biden's above criticism, but my goodness, he's only been in office 10 days. Now, to be fair, there would have been some on the left, and there were, who didn't give Trump a chance, and they were protesting the day he was inaugurated. I remember at the time, I said, okay, Trump's won, let's give him a chance. Um, but these people they're demanding that Biden reaches out across the aisle, but they're not exactly helping matters by just trashing everything he says and does. Um, I've got concerns about Biden. I've got concerns, for example, as to how deep the, let's say, woke left influences the Democratic Party and how much that will influence his presidency. But don't forget, it was Joe Biden who got the nomination, not Bernie Sanders. That's important. I think ultimately Biden's probably quite a centrist figure, probably more to the left. He's probably going to be one of the more left wing presidents. But I really, really don't think we're going to see a radical administration, particularly in terms of um, there will certainly be things that demand scrutiny. I mean, if the administration, for example, pushes critical race theory, that's something I have a big problem with, and I think it causes a lot more harm than good. There's going to be areas like that I strongly disagree with, and I'll take issue with. But whatever else, at least now we have a president who acts like a president. Um, I mean, for all the talk of Donald Trump standing up to China, Donald Trump polarized international alliances. Donald Trump pandered to dictators. It's a fact. He did. It's on the record. He stood beside Vladimir Putin and disparaged American media, standing beside the Russian dictator. You know, if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt, the Singapore summit, oh well, Nixon went to China, except that Trump's meeting with Kim, in retrospect, proved to be a failure. And one could easily consider that Trump was misled. So much for Sleepy Joe. Trump was misled. If that had been Obama or a Democratic politician doing that, you can imagine the American right would be screaming he's a communist. So I'm sick of the double standards. And yeah, I'm not even American and I'm tired of Trump cultists. Maybe I can say that because we have quite a few in this country. I mean, there's times you could easily be forgiven for thinking that British political discourse, or at least culture wars that spread over here, we're almost like the 51st state. We're so invested in American politics. And, I'm not saying we are, but there is an exceptional level of interest in Britain in American politics, more so than there would be in the rest of Europe. So, British Trump supporters are just as vocal as their American counterparts because there's this attitude. I think that I sort of see two different kinds of Trump supporter. So there's the many, many Trump supporters who voted for him because they were genuinely concerned about democratic policies. They thought he was the better candidate, and that's that. I'm fine with that. That's their right. And I'm certainly not saying that 70 million plus people are ignorant rednecks, right? That's not true. I think there's a lot of moderate Republicans who did vote for Trump because they just felt he was the better option in 2016. A lot of them have turned against Trump now. I honestly think at this point, the only people really defending this disgraced former president are hardcore Trump supporters. Now, cultist might sound like a disparaging term, but what other way is there to describe it? When you have people who are so idolizing a leader that they don't think objectively, I do say that is cult-like behavior. So it's disparaging, but I think it's the truth. If you are so idolizing of a leader, any leader, that you cannot think objectively and you cannot rationally even concede that there are flaws, that there are weaknesses, that everything's fake news, then yeah, it's cult-like. You might find equivalents on the left. I mean, I argue you get that around Greta Thunberg. Um, in the early Obama era, it was there to an extent. It was. Even Obama had to temper it himself. He said, "Look, I'm not going to be a perfect president." But what you get with Donald Trump, he's kind of been made into this absurdly Robin Hood type figure. Oh, he's not the little man though. He's a multi-billionaire. This idea he stood up to the establishment. There's no doubt that Trump is a renegade figure. I think he will go down in history in the same sort of narrative of likes of George Wallace. I don't think he's comparable to any other president. Not Nixon. I've talked about this a few times now. I think Nixon was a lot smarter. I think Nixon was a lot more of a statesman than Donald Trump is. Andrew Jackson, there's some similarities there. Um, but, Jackson is remembered, apart from his racist policies, he's also remembered for Jacksonian democracy. Donald Trump has tried to trample on democracy. Um, I just don't know how any intelligent person can enthusiastically support this man. I can appreciate people defending him, defending some aspects of his record. Okay, so he did change the rhetoric on China, but I'm sick and tired of Trump cultists acting like he cannot be criticized. Um, I mean, when you look at his achievements, there were a few. Some of the peace deals in the Middle East definitely deserve praise. The changing rhetoric on China deserves praise. Until the pandemic, the economy was doing well. Okay. Probably not as well as Trump made out, but it was doing well. So his record as president wasn't a total disaster, but I think even his own sensible supporters were frustrated by the fact that he was obsessing by the election results rather than focusing on his achievements. I mean, in 1960, when Nixon lost, he didn't make some sort of big claim that Kennedy had stole the election. And actually, there were some suspicions that Kennedy had used political machinery in Texas to sway votes. But Nixon knew that he would look like a sore loser. Nixon was a very clever political operative. And of course, he came back to the White House years later. I saw an old video yesterday and it surprised me because Nixon was in London, 1969. Now, bear in mind, this is the height of the Vietnam War. He was cheered. I was genuinely surprised by that because I thought there would have been big anti-war protests. There wasn't, at least not in that video. But I honestly think when you get, because there's overlap with these people and, the QAnon insanity. Even though Trump's no longer on Twitter, I think it would be naive to think that Trump's gone. He may no longer be in the White House, but this man could do serious damage. And it's a very volatile situation. But the fact is, Joe Biden is now saying we have to show leadership by being part of the international community. Signing up to the Paris Climate Agreement again, um, offering, promising to work with international alliances. And it'll be interesting to see what happens when the G7 summit occurs in Cornwall this year. I know the G7 has lost its influence in recent years, but that will ostensibly be Biden's first trip to the UK. I really do hope that both sides make significant efforts to get a strong partnership. I know that the Biden administration is somewhat wary of Johnson because of previous comments, but there is a point about that. Firstly, those who think that Biden will be anti-British because of his Irish links, um, they're forgetting the fact that Joe Biden was very vocally supportive of this country during the Falklands War. Point one. Point two, remember that Harris and Biden had some tensions during the Democratic primaries. What did Biden do? He put her on his, he made her his running mate. So that shows to me that Biden can move on. He can overlook things. It is true that there will be some Democrats that haven't forgiven Boris Johnson for his remarks about Obama being half Kenyan. There will be some mistrust there. But, Boris Johnson's been statesmanlike. He's reached out. So I think the Biden side also need to do likewise. And actually, it would be useful for Biden to have a European ally when it comes to China because Germany right now is appeasing Beijing and it's pathetic. So to have London taking a strong stance with Washington, that'll be a good thing. Um, what else? Yeah, it's like you all you have to do is click on a video about Joe Biden, and the Trump cultists are already throwing out their ad hominem attack. So Sleepy Joe doesn't say anything. They've got no real solid arguments. If they were sort of breaking down actual policy um, critique, if they were saying this is a bad policy because, fair enough, but it's just ad hominem attacks. That's all they've got, very much in keeping in line with their hero, because Donald Trump was in many ways a very petty individual. Um, he was very powerful by nature of his office, but in my opinion, he was not a president. He just was not presidential in any way, shape, or form. And I just don't understand how any intelligent adult, whether you're left wing or right wing, could vocally defend this man. I just don't understand how anyone could admire Donald Trump as if he's some sort of brave renegade. There's nothing brave about getting into Twitter feuds at midnight. There's nothing brave about telling lies repeatedly in public office. There's nothing brave about trying to undermine democracy. You know, I just think they make a fool of themselves by so vocally trying to defend this man. It's not that Biden shouldn't be criticised. That's not what I'm saying. But he's literally been in office for 10 days. Let's just see. Let's just judge him on his record. But the idea that Biden's been sleepy, that's ridiculous. Whatever you think of him overturning Trump era policies, there is one that I'm unhappy about, by the way. Um, the I forget the formal name, but the one where he overturned gender recognition. In other words, transgender athletes can compete fully. It was in that whole field, and that's so much for breaking the glass ceiling. That will put up a glass ceiling to biological women, and that's very much Biden pandering to the woke left. I'm not happy about that. Biden deserves criticism for that because it's misguided, and it's a contradiction to helping women. Anyway, all I'm saying is if you voted for Donald Trump, right, you would have had your reasons for doing so, but just give Biden a chance. I mean, if you're saying Biden is not doing anything to unify, what are you doing to unify? If all you are doing is bad mouthing the new president and just trashing every single thing he says and does, give the man a chance.